The ammonia from the industrial cleaner had burned a permanent path through my sinuses months ago. Now, I barely noticed it as I pushed the yellow maintenance cart down the marble hallway of the Apex Tower's executive floor. My reflection distorted in the polished stone that cost more per square foot than I'd make in a year. 3 a.m. The city that never sleeps was finally catching its breath. And I had 2 hours to make the 42nd floor disappear into gleaming perfection before the executives arrived at 5:30 to destroy it all over again. My name is Sofia Reyes, 28 years old, and I'd been cleaning the Apex Tower for 11 months ever since I'd walked away from my old life in Chicago with nothing but a duffel bag and my grandmother's rosary. The job came through an agency that didn't ask questions if you worked the graveyard shift, didn't complain about the pay, and kept your mouth shut about what you saw. I'd gotten very good at keeping my mouth shut. The Apex Tower housed some of New York's most powerful players. Hedge fund managers on floors 20 through 30. Corporate lawyers occupying 31 through 39. And the top 3 floors? Those belonged to Donovan Cole's empire, a real estate development company that everyone knew was real estate the way icebergs are ice. Most of the operation stayed hidden beneath the surface. I'd learned not to think too carefully about what kind of deals were negotiated in those top-floor conference rooms. What kind of money flowed through accounts I wasn't supposed to understand. What kind of men visited at strange hours with briefcases handcuffed to their wrists. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Tonight felt different though. The air on the 42nd floor held a tension I couldn't name, like the pressure dropped before a storm. The usual security guard, Marcus, a grandfather type who showed me pictures of his family and shared his wife's homemade empanadas, had been replaced by 2 men I'd never seen before. Younger, harder, with the kind of watchful eyes that tracked movement like predators. They hadn't acknowledged me when I'd signed in, just examined my ID badge with suspicious intensity before waving me through with curt nods. As if janitors were capable of corporate espionage, I started in the reception area, emptying trash bins filled with the detritus of wealth, takeout containers from restaurants I couldn't afford, crumpled drafts of contracts worth millions, empty bottles of water that cost $8 each from the building's boutique market. My hands moved on autopilot, wiped down the reception desk, vacuumed the sitting area, cleaned the glass coffee table that never seemed to accumulate fingerprints because important people apparently didn't touch things themselves. The executive offices lined the perimeter, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of Manhattan that made the city look like a circuit board of lights. Donovan Cole's office occupied the corner, the largest space with the best views, decorated with the kind of understated luxury that whispered rather than shouted its price tag. I'd cleaned his office dozens of times. Always the same routine. Empty the trash, dust the bookshelves lined with leather-bound first editions he probably never read, wipe down the massive desk made from reclaimed wood that cost more than a car, vacuum the Persian rug that had probably witnessed more secrets than most confessionals. But tonight, when I used my master key to enter, something was wrong. Not obviously wrong, nothing broken or disturbed. But my grandmother used to say that women in our family had instincts that saved lives, that we could sense danger the way animals sense earthquakes before they strike. I'd always thought it was superstition until the night in Chicago when that instinct made me walk a different route home, made me avoid the alley where my ex-boyfriend Marco waited with intentions that would have ended very badly for me. That same instinct was screaming now. I stood in the doorway of Donovan Cole's office, my cart blocking the entrance, and let my eyes adjust to the darkness. The city lights provided enough illumination to see shapes, shadows, the familiar landscape of expensive furniture and corporate power. There, behind one of the bookshelves, a tiny red light, barely visible, blinking with steady rhythm. My heart rate spiked. I'd cleaned this office enough times to know every detail, every object, every decorative element. That light didn't belong. I should leave. Should finish my shift, collect my paycheck, go home to my studio apartment in Queens, where the biggest danger was the subway ride. Should maintain the invisibility that had kept me safe for 11 months. But I thought about Marcus, the regular security guard who wasn't here tonight. About the 2 hard-eyed replacements downstairs. About the tension in the air that felt like a held breath waiting to exhale into violence. And I thought about Chicago, about Marco and the life I'd fled. About learning too late that staying silent in the face of danger didn't make you safe, it just made you complicit. I left my cart in the hallway and moved quietly into the office, pulling my phone from my pocket and activating the flashlight with shaking fingers. The red light was coming from behind a leather-bound collection of Shakespeare's works, the kind of prop that screamed, "I'm cultured," while collecting dust. I pulled out Hamlet, then Macbeth, carefully stacking them on the desk. Behind where they'd stood, nestled in the shadow of the bookshelf, was a small black device, no larger than a deck of cards. A camera, professional grade, with a lens pointed directly at Donovan Cole's desk. The red light blinked steadily, recording. My hands went cold despite the warm building. This wasn't random. This was surveillance, planted by someone with access to this office. Someone who knew the security patterns, someone who wanted to capture whatever happened at that desk. I looked at the desk itself, at the papers spread across its surface. Even in the dim light, I could make out numbers, lots of numbers, and what looked like architectural renderings of a massive development project. A post-it note in masculine handwriting read, "Transfer authorization $200 million Thursday 9 a.m., $200 million. Being transferred on Thursday morning," which was I checked my phone today, "in 6 hours, and someone had planted a camera to record it. I should definitely leave." This was so far above my pay grade, it might as well be happening on another planet. Rich people's problems, criminal surveillance, corporate espionage, none of it had anything to do with a janitor from Queens who just wanted to keep her head down and survive. But then I thought about the 2 new security guards, about Marcus, who'd been replaced tonight of all nights, about how surveillance cameras needed someone to plant them, someone with access, someone trusted, about how whatever was happening at 9 a.m. was probably going to end very badly for someone. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. "Mija, when you see evil being planned and you say nothing, you become part of the evil." I pulled out my phone again, taking photos of the camera, of its position, of the serial number visible on its base. Then I photographed the desk, the papers, the post-it note with its damning information. The office door opened. I spun around, my phone clutched in suddenly sweaty hands, my heart threatening to crack through my ribs. Donovan Cole stood in the doorway. I'd seen him before, of course, dozens of times in passing in elevators, walking through the lobby, entering or leaving his office just as I was finishing my cleaning. But I'd never been this close, never been alone with him, never had those ice blue eyes focus on me with complete attention. He was younger than I'd thought. Maybe mid-30s, with dark hair that was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. He wore slacks and a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, no tie, the top to buttons undone. Even exhausted, and he looked exhausted. Shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. He carried himself with the kind of unconscious authority that made people step aside without being asked, "Who are you?" His voice was low, controlled, but with an edge of steel underneath. Not threatening exactly, but absolutely not to be trifled with. Sofia Reyes. I'm the night janitor." I held up my ID badge with trembling fingers, as if that explained why I was standing in his office at 3 in the morning with my phone out, surrounded by books I'd pulled from his shelves. His eyes moved from my badge to the phone in my hand, to the bookshelf, to the small camera now visible in the gap where the books had been. His expression didn't change, but something happened to the air in the room, a sudden drop in temperature, a sharpening of danger. "Step away from the desk," he said quietly. I moved immediately, putting distance between myself and the evidence of whatever I'd stumbled into. My mind raced through explanations, excuses, anything that would make this situation less catastrophic than it appeared. Donovan moved to the bookshelf with controlled precision, examining the camera without touching it. His jaw tightened, the only outward sign of emotion. "How long has this been here?" He asked it without looking at me, his attention fixed on the surveillance device. "I don't know. I just found it tonight." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I clean this office 3 times a week. It wasn't here on Monday." "You're certain?" "I dust those books every time." I would have seen it. He finally looked at me, really looked, and I felt the weight of his assessment. I knew what he was seeing, a woman in a gray maintenance uniform that was 2 sizes too large, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, no makeup, no jewelry, except for my grandmother's rosary tucked beneath my shirt. Nobody important, nobody threatening, nobody who should matter in his world. "What were you doing with your phone?" The question was sharp, direct. I could lie, should lie, claim I was just using the flashlight to clean. Hadn't noticed anything unusual. was just a janitor doing her job, but something about his eyes, the intelligence in them, the danger, but also the exhaustion and maybe something like desperation made me tell the truth. Taking evidence, I said quietly, of the camera, of its placement, of the documents on your desk about the $200 million transfer happening this morning. I paused. Because whoever planted that camera is planning something. And the regular security guard who's worked here for years wasn't at his post tonight. He was replaced by two men I've never seen before, and that felt wrong. And I thought. I stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence. What had I thought? That I could help? That warning him would matter? That getting involved in whatever dangerous game was being played in this office was somehow my responsibility. You thought what? Donovan prompted, moving closer. Not threateningly, but with intense focus, as if my answer actually mattered. I thought someone was setting you up, I finished quietly. And I thought you'd want to know before 9 a.m. Silence stretched between us. Outside the windows, New York glittered with indifferent beauty. Millions of people sleeping or working or living their uncomplicated lives, while I stood in a billionaire's office confessing to potential corporate espionage. Show me the photos, Donovan said finally. I handed him my phone with shaking hands. He scrolled through them, his expression unreadable, occasionally zooming in on details. When he reached the image of the desk documents, he stopped, his jaw tightening again. These papers were supposed to be locked in my safe, he said, more to himself than to me. Someone took them out, left them visible for the camera to record. He looked up. You understand what you've found, Sofia Reyes? A surveillance operation, I said. Someone with access to your office, to your safe, to your security protocols. Someone who wants documentation of that transfer, probably to use it against you. His slight smile held no humor. You're more observant than most of my executive team. I'm invisible, I corrected. People don't guard their actions around janitors. We see things because nobody thinks we're looking. But you were looking. I was cleaning. I just happened to notice what didn't belong. I gestured to the camera. That's new. The replacement security guards are new. The timing right before a massive financial transfer, that's not coincidence. Donovan pulled out his own phone, typing rapidly. The blue light from the screen cast shadows across his face, emphasizing the sharp angles of his cheekbones, the firm line of his jaw. He looked like he was carved from marble and calculation. The security company, he said quietly, still typing. They were recommended by my CFO 6 months ago. Richard Moss, my most trusted financial officer. The way he said trusted made it clear that trust had just evaporated. He's been pushing for this transfer, saying the development deal requires immediate capital deployment. $200 million moved to an offshore construction account this morning, supposedly to secure contracts before our competitors can bid, but it's not really for construction, I said. Understanding dawning. No, Donovan's expression went cold. Colder than I'd thought human features could manage. It's theft. Richard set this up the camera to document my authorization, the transfer scheduled for when he knew I'd be in early meetings, unable to verify until it was too late. By the time I discovered the money was gone, he'd have evidence that I personally approved it, making me look either criminally negligent or complicit. He moved to his desk, pulling open drawers with controlled violence. The transfer documents, the authorization codes, they were in my safe. Only 3 people have that combination. Me, my head of security. He trailed off, realization settling over his features like frost. And your CFO, I finished quietly. And Richard, Donovan's hands stilled on the desk. Marcus, the regular guard, he's been with me for 8 years. Completely loyal. Which means Richard had him removed tonight, replaced with his own people, so there'd be no witnesses to question the setup. He looked at me. Except you. The janitor nobody pays attention to. I thought about leaving my cart in the hallway, about walking into this office instead of just cleaning from the doorway, as I usually did, about noticing the red light that anyone else would have missed or ignored. What are you going to do? I asked. Donovan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between the camera, the documents, and his phone screen. I'm going to let Richard think his plan is working, he said finally. Let him believe I'm walking into his trap unaware. And then, his smile was sharp as broken glass. And then I'm going to spring my own trap. But first he looked at me directly, and I felt the full force of his attention like physical weight. I need to know if you're willing to help me, or if you'd prefer to walk away from this situation before it gets significantly more dangerous. I should walk away. Should claim ignorance, finish my shift, go home, and never think about cameras or CFOs or $200 million betrayals again. But I thought about my grandmother. About her belief that staying silent made you complicit. About Chicago and Marco and the life I'd fled because I'd finally found the courage to act instead of endure. About the fact that Donovan Cole was looking at me, really seeing me not as invisible labor but as someone whose choice mattered, whose help he was actually requesting rather than demanding. What do you need? I asked, my voice steadier than my hands. Something shifted in his expression. Respect? Maybe. Or recognition. I need a witness who Richard doesn't know exists. Someone who can document what happens this morning, who can testify, if necessary, that the authorization was forged, that this was a planned theft rather than my negligence. You want me to stay, to watch the trap. I want you to be my insurance policy, he corrected. The piece Richard doesn't know about, can't plan for, can't eliminate because he doesn't realize you exist. He paused. It will be dangerous. Richard has already proven he's willing to compromise security, to forge documents, to steal $200 million. Men who operate at that level don't hesitate to remove obstacles permanently. You're saying he might try to kill you, I said flatly. I'm saying if his plan fails and he realizes he's been exposed, he'll become desperate. And desperate men with access to resources and criminal connections are the most dangerous kind. Donovan moved closer, his eyes searching my face. I can't ask you to take that risk. I can pay you for the information you've already provided, ensure your safety, help you relocate if necessary. I'll stay, I interrupted. The words came out before I could second-guess them, driven by the same instinct that had made me photograph the camera instead of walking away. I'll be your witness. Why? The question was genuine, curious. You don't know me anything. This isn't your fight, Sofia. I thought about the best answer, the strategic one that would make me sound rational and calculated. But what came out was simply the truth, because someone set up an elaborate plan to destroy you, and you deserve to know about it before it succeeds. Because I've spent 11 months being invisible, and I'm tired of pretending I don't see things that matter. I met his eyes. And because my grandmother taught me that when you witness evil being planned, you have two choices: become part of it through silence, or fight it by speaking up. Donovan studied me for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. Partners then. At least for the next 6 hours, I took his hand, feeling the warmth of his palm against mine, the firm grip that suggested both strength and respect. Partners, I agreed. As we shook on it, sealing whatever strange alliance we'd just formed. I caught our reflection in the dark windows, a billionaire in expensive shirt sleeves and a janitor in an oversized uniform. Two people from completely different worlds united by a camera. A betrayal, and a choice to fight back instead of accepting the inevitable. My grandmother used to say our family had instincts that saved lives. I'd just used mine to save Donovan Cole's empire. Now I had to hope it wouldn't cost me everything. Donovan released my hand and immediately shifted into motion, his exhaustion replaced by sharp focus. We have 6 hours before Richard executes his plan. We need to use that time strategically. He moved to his desk, unlocking a drawer and pulling out a tablet. His fingers flew across the screen with practiced efficiency. First, I'm calling in my personal security team, people Richard doesn't control. They'll secure this floor, review all surveillance footage, identify exactly when that camera was planted and by whom. I watched him work, impressed by how quickly he'd transformed from a man discovering betrayal to a strategist planning counterattack. This was who Donovan Cole really was. Beneath the expensive suits and corner office, a fighter who'd built an empire by out-hinking his enemies. What about the regular guard? I asked. Marcus. If Richard had him removed tonight, I'll have my people check on him immediately. Donovan's voice went hard. If Richard hurt him to facilitate this setup, that's another crime to answer for. He made several calls in rapid succession, speaking in the kind of coded language that suggested this wasn't his first time dealing with betrayal. Bring the team to Apex. 42nd floor. Maximum discretion. Yes, tonight. Potential internal breach. CFO level. No, don't alert building security. They may be compromised. Between calls, his eyes kept returning to me, assessing, recalculating. I knew what he was thinking. I was the unknown variable in his equation. The janitor who'd stumbled into his crisis and might be exactly what I appeared to be. Or might be something more complicated. You said you've worked here 11 months, he said, during a pause between calls. Where were you before? Chicago, I answered carefully. Different life, different problems, problems that made you relocate to New York and take a graveyard shift cleaning job that pays barely above minimum wage. His tone wasn't accusatory, just observant. That suggests you were running from something significant. He wasn't wrong. And if we were going to be partners, even temporary partners, he deserved some truth. I was involved with someone dangerous, I said quietly. Marco Salazar. I thought he was just a small-time dealer, thought I could handle it, thought I could change him. I laughed bitterly at my own naivety. By the time I understood what he really was, a mid-level enforcer for the Salazar cartel, I was into deep. I knew things I shouldn't know, had seen things I shouldn't have seen. Donovan's expression sharpened with recognition. The Salazar cartel. They control most of the drug trade in the Midwest, and they don't leave loose ends, I continued. When I finally tried to leave Marco, he made it clear that leaving him meant leaving everything: my job, my apartment, my friends, my entire life. Because if I stayed in Chicago, eventually I'd become a liability he'd have to eliminate. So you ran. I survived. I met his eyes. I learned that sometimes running is the smartest move you can make. That being invisible is better than being dead. That keeping your head down and your mouth shut is how ordinary people navigate extraordinary danger. And yet, Donovan observed, tonight you didn't keep your mouth shut. You saw that camera, and instead of walking away, instead of maintaining the invisibility that's kept you safe for almost a year, you chose to get involved. I thought about that, about why I'd made the choice I'd made. Maybe I got tired of running. Or maybe I just recognized the look of a setup because I've seen them before. Marco used to set people up, make them think they were safe, that they were trusted, right up until the moment he destroyed them. I gestured to the camera. This has that same feel. Calculated, patient, designed to make you the villain in your own destruction. Something dark flickered across Donovan's face. Richard has been my CFO for years. We've closed deals worth billions together. I trusted him with access to everything: my finances, my businesses, my security protocols. His jaw tightened. Apparently that trust was the weapon he needed. Before I could respond, the elevator chimed. Donovan's hand moved with surprising speed to a desk drawer, emerging with a compact pistol held with obvious familiarity. He moved to position himself between me and the door, his body language shifting from corporate executive to something far more dangerous. The office door opened, and 3 men entered. They moved with the controlled efficiency of military training, spreading out to cover angles, clearing the room with professional precision. Before the first one spoke, Mr. Cole, perimeter is secure. What's the situation? Donovan lowered the gun, but didn't put it away. Marcus was removed from his post tonight. I need him found and verified safe within the hour. Building security may be compromised. Richard Moss has been planning something, and tonight is execution. He gestured to the camera. Professional surveillance planted in my office. Positioned to record a financial authorization I never gave. The lead security man, tall, black, with the kind of presence that suggested he'd seen combat and survived, moved to examine the camera. Clean installation. Whoever placed this knew what they were doing. His eyes shifted to me, assessing threat level in a fraction of a second. Who's she? Sofia Reyes. The janitor who found the camera and warned me instead of walking away. Donovan's tone carried weight, making it clear I was under his protection. She stays with me until this is resolved. The security man nodded, accepting this without question. I'm James. We'll sweep the office for additional devices, pull security footage, identify everyone who had access in the past 72 hours. He looked at Donovan. You're expecting this to escalate? Richard's planning to steal $200 million from me this morning. When that fails, when he realizes he's been exposed, yes, I expect escalation. Donovan's voice went cold. Prepare for active threat protocols. Lethal force authorized if necessary. I felt the temperature in the room drop as the security team absorbed this. They weren't corporate guards. They were soldiers, and Donovan had just given them permission to go to war. As James and his team began their sweep, Donovan guided me to a sitting area in the corner of his office: leather chairs and a low table that probably cost more than my yearly salary. He'd holstered the gun, but remained alert, his eyes tracking every movement his security made. You should know, he said quietly, settling into the chair across from me, that Richard won't be the only casualty when this ends. Everyone involved in this betrayal, from whoever planted that camera to the security guards he brought in tonight, they'll all face consequences. You mean they'll die? I said, not asking. I mean they'll answer for betrayal. Permanently. His eyes met mine. Does that bother you, Sofia? Knowing that your warning will result in deaths? I thought about Marco, about the people who'd disappeared from his life when they became inconvenient, about the violence I'd witnessed, and the evil I'd enabled through silence. No, I said honestly. What bothers me is that it doesn't bother me as much as it should. What bothers me is that when you said lethal force authorized, I felt relieved instead of horrified. I leaned back in the expensive leather chair. I used to be a good person, Donovan. I used to believe in second chances and redemption and calling the police when you witness crimes. What changed? Chicago changed me. Marco changed me. Watching good people die while bad people thrive because they had better connections and fewer morals, that changed me. I met his eyes. So no, it doesn't bother me that Richard and his accomplices will face permanent consequences. It bothers me that I'm capable of witnessing it without flinching. Donovan studied me in the dim light of his office, this strange hour between night and morning when the city held its breath. You're not what I expected, Sofia Reyes. What did you expect? A frightened janitor. Someone who'd take money to forget what she saw, or who'd run at the first sign of real danger. He paused. Instead, I got someone who understands betrayal intimately, who's survived worse than most people can imagine, and who chose to stand and fight instead of maintaining the safety of invisibility. Maybe I'm just tired of being afraid, I said quietly. Or maybe, Donovan replied, you're finally angry enough to do something about the things that made you afraid in the first place. The truth of that statement hit me like physical impact. He was right. For 11 months I'd been running, hiding, surviving. But tonight, when I'd seen that camera and understood what it meant, something had shifted. The fear that had driven me from Chicago had transformed into fury at Marco for making me run, at Richard for thinking he could destroy someone through patient betrayal, at a world where the powerful preyed on everyone else and called it business. Mr. Cole. James approached with a tablet, his expression grim. We pulled the security footage. The camera was installed at 2:43 a.m. on Tuesday night by someone using Richard Moss's access credentials and wearing maintenance coveralls to avoid attention. Show me, Donovan commanded. James played the footage. A figure in gray coveralls, face mostly hidden by a baseball cap, entered the office with confident familiarity. They went straight to the bookshelf, installed the camera with professional efficiency, and left within 4 minutes. The whole operation took less time than I spent vacuuming the reception area. Can you identify them? Donovan asked, not definitively from this angle, but James froze the frame, zooming in on the figure's hands. That ring on his right hand, distinctive, gold with a blue stone. Donovan's expression went absolutely still. Richard wears a ring exactly like that. Yale class ring. He never takes it off, so he planted it himself, I said. Couldn't trust anyone else to do it right. Which means he has no accomplices inside my organization, Donovan continued, his strategic mind clearly working through implications. The security guards, the camera operator monitoring the feed, they're all external contractors. Richard kept this compartmentalized to minimize exposure. Smart, James observed. Harder to unravel if there's no internal conspiracy to investigate. Also his weakness, I interjected. Both men looked at me, and I felt the weight of their attention. If he kept it compartmentalized, that means his external people don't know your organization, don't know your capabilities, don't know what they're really walking into this morning. Donovan's smile was sharp and cold. They're expecting a standard corporate theft. What they'll get is significantly more complicated. He stood, moving to the windows where dawn was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of gray and gold. James, I want Richard brought here at 8:45, 15 minutes before the scheduled transfer. Tell him it's urgent, that we need to review the authorization documents one final time. Make it sound routine. And the external contractors? James asked. Let them maintain position. Let them think everything is proceeding as planned. Donovan turned back to us, and in the growing light I could see the calculation in his eyes, the dangerous intelligence that had built an empire. When Richard arrives, when he sees that camera is still recording, he'll think he's won. That his plan is working perfectly. And then? I asked. And then, Donovan said quietly, he'll learn that betrayal comes with a price he can't afford to pay. The next 3 hours passed intense preparation. James's security team transformed Donovan's office into a tactical operations center, additional cameras installed to capture every angle. Audio recording equipment hidden in the bookshelves, escape routes mapped and secured. They worked with the quiet efficiency of people who'd done this before, who understood that the difference between success and failure often came down to details most people never noticed. I stayed close to Donovan, partly because he'd insisted on keeping me in his sight, partly because leaving felt like abandoning ship mid-storm. He'd positioned me in a small conference room adjacent to his office, close enough to witness what happened, far enough to maintain plausible deniability if things went catastrophically wrong. "You should eat something," Donovan said, appearing in the conference room doorway with 2 cups of coffee and a bag from a bakery I recognized as the expensive place 3 blocks over. The kind where a croissant cost $12 and tasted like butter and dreams. I accepted the coffee gratefully, my hands wrapping around the warm cup. "You went out." James went out. "I don't leave this floor until Richard is handled." He settled into the chair across from me, pushing the bakery bag in my direction. Chocolate croissant, blueberry muffin, and some kind of Danish thing, the woman behind the counter said was her favorite. "I wasn't sure what you'd prefer." The casual thoughtfulness of the gesture caught me off guard. "You didn't have to do this. You've been awake all night. Found a surveillance camera that's saving me $200 million and probably my freedom. And you're about to witness something that might be traumatic." His slight smile held dark humor. "The least I can do is provide quality carbohydrates." I pulled out the chocolate croissant, the pastry still warm, flaking apart in my hands with buttery perfection. We ate in companionable silence for a moment. The absurdity of the situation, settling over me, sharing expensive pastries with a billionaire at dawn while preparing to spring a trap on his CFO. "Can I ask you something?" I said finally. "After everything you've done tonight, you can ask me anything. When you pulled that gun earlier, you knew how to use it. Really knew. That wasn't just a rich man with a permit for protection. You've used that weapon before." Donovan was quiet for a moment, his coffee cup suspended halfway to his lips. "Yes," he said finally. "I've used it before. To kill people? To protect what's mine." He set the cup down, his blue eyes meeting mine directly. "My father built this company from nothing. Started as a construction foreman, worked his way up, made smart investments, took calculated risks. By the time I was born, coal development was worth $50 million. By the time I was 18, it was worth $500 million. He leaned back, his gaze moving to the windows where Manhattan was waking up to another day. "And then my father made a mistake. He trusted his partner, a man named Thomas Garrett, who'd been with him since the beginning. Thomas was like family, my father's best friend, my godfather." I heard the bitterness in his voice, recognized the particular pain of familial betrayal. Thomas wanted more than partnership. He wanted control. So he orchestrated a takeover, falsified documents, bribed board members, made it look like my father was embezzling from the company. Donovan's jaw tightened. The stress of the accusations, the investigation, the betrayal from someone he'd trusted completely, it killed him. Heart attack at 53. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. I was 22, fresh out of business school. Everyone expected me to fold, to accept a settlement, to walk away and let Thomas take what my father had built. His smile was cold. Instead, I learned everything I could about how Thomas had structured his takeover, found the weaknesses in his plan, discovered that he'd used offshore accounts to hide the bribes, accounts that could be traced if you knew where to look and had enough money to hire the right investigators. "You exposed him. I destroyed him." The statement was flat, final. "Provided evidence to the district attorney that sent Thomas to prison for 15 years. Sued him personally for damages that bankrupted him. And when he got out of prison and tried to rebuild, tried to come after me for revenge." Donovan paused. "That's when I used the gun." The confession hung in the air between us. Outside, the city continued its indifferent morning routine, unaware that in this conference room, a man was admitting to murder over expensive coffee and pastries. "Self-defense?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Legal defense," he corrected. "Thomas broke into my apartment with a weapon and clear intent. My lawyers argued I feared for my life. The court agreed. His eyes held mine. But between us, Sofia, I didn't fear for my life. I ended his because he'd destroyed my father and thought he could destroy me too. And I wanted him to know, in those final moments, that betrayal has permanent consequences. I should have been horrified, should have seen a confession of premeditated murder, and recognized that I was sitting across from a man capable of killing in cold blood. Instead, I felt a strange kinship, because I understood that kind of rage, that need for justice when the system failed to provide it, that willingness to become what was necessary to survive and protect what mattered. That's why you built this security team, I said. Why? You have protocols for betrayal. You've been preparing for Richard ever since Thomas. I've been preparing for the next betrayal since my father died, believing his best friend was loyal. Donovan's voice carried the weight of old grief and hard lessons. Trust is beautiful, Sofia. Trust is also fatal. So I trust very few people, very carefully. And I always have contingencies. And now you're trusting me. Now I'm trusting that you understand betrayal intimately enough to recognize it. And that you've survived worse than what's coming this morning. He paused. Am I wrong? I thought about Chicago, about Marco, about the night he'd explained very calmly, very rationally exactly what would happen to me if I ever tried to leave or talk to the police about what I'd seen. About the choice I'd made to run instead of fighting, to survive instead of seeking justice. You're not wrong, I said quietly. But I need you to understand something. I ran from Chicago because I wasn't strong enough to fight Marco, because I was terrified and alone, and I knew that taking him on directly would get me killed. I met Donovan's eyes. I'm still terrified, but I'm tired of letting fear make all my decisions. Fear is useful, Donovan observed. It keeps you alert, keeps you strategic. The problem is when fear becomes paralysis instead of motivation. And anger? I asked. Is that useful too? His smile held understanding. Anger is the most useful emotion in business. It's just that most people waste their anger on volume and drama when they should be channeling it into strategy and action. He stood, collecting our empty cups and pastry wrappers. Richard is angry at me, angry that I have more, that I inherited what he thinks he deserves, that I don't acknowledge his contributions with the recognition he craves. So he built an elaborate plan to humiliate me and steal from me simultaneously. But you're angrier, I observed. I'm furious, he corrected. But I'm channeling that fury into something productive, into ensuring that Richard's betrayal costs him everything, that it serves as a lesson to anyone else who might consider similar treachery. He moved toward the door, then paused. 7:30. Richard will be here in an hour and 15 minutes. You should prepare yourself for what's coming. What exactly is coming? Donovan's expression went cold, distant. The mask he probably wore in boardrooms and negotiations sliding into place. Justice. My kind. The kind that doesn't require lawyers or judges, or the pretense of civilized process. After he left, I sat alone in the conference room, watching the city wake up through the windows. Somewhere out there, Richard Moss was probably having breakfast, maybe reviewing his plan one final time, confident that by noon he'd be $200 million richer and Donovan Cole would be destroyed. He had no idea what he was walking into. My phone buzzed, my personal phone. Not the cheap burner I used for work. I pulled it out, my stomach clenching when I saw the Chicago area code. There was only one person who'd be calling me from Chicago. I shouldn't answer. Shouldn't give Marco any indication of where I was, or that I was still alive and functioning. But my thumb moved almost automatically, accepting the call before my brain could override the impulse. Sofia. Marco's voice was smooth, warm, the same voice that had convinced me he was worth loving before I understood what he really was. It's been almost a year. I was starting to think something happened to you. What do you want, Marco? I kept my voice flat, emotionless, even as my heart rate spiked with remembered fear. Just checking in on my girl, making sure you're okay. I could hear the smile in his voice, the predatory amusement. You disappeared so suddenly. Didn't even say goodbye. That hurt, Sofia. After everything we meant to each other, I left because staying would have gotten me killed. You made that very clear, did I? He sounded genuinely surprised, as if threatening me had been so casual he'd forgotten about it. I think you misunderstood, baby. I was protecting you, explaining how dangerous it would be if certain people thought you knew too much about our operations. But you chose to run instead of trusting me to keep you safe. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced. I might have believed it if I hadn't lived through his version of protection. I'm hanging up now, I said. Wait, his voice sharpened. I'm calling because I heard something interesting. About a cleaning company in New York. About a woman matching your description working graveyard shifts at some corporate tower. He paused, letting the threat sink in. Manhattan's a big city, Sofia, but not so big that you can hide forever. Especially not when you're using your real name on employment documents. Ice flooded my veins. You're bluffing. Am I? He laughed. Tell you what, you come back to Chicago. We talk about this like adults, and I forget I ever tracked you down. Or you keep hiding, and eventually one of my associates in New York pays you a visit. Your choice, baby, but choose quickly. My patience has limits. The call ended. I sat frozen, the phone trembling in my hand, 11 months of careful invisibility shattered by a single call. Marco had found me, knew where I worked, could send people after me whenever he wanted. The conference room door opened. Donovan took one look at my face and his expression shifted from professional to genuinely concerned. What happened? The words came out shaky, broken. Marco, he called. He found me. He knows I'm in New York, knows I work at Apex Tower. I looked up at Donovan, fear and fury warring in my chest. I can't go back to Chicago. I can't. But if I stay here, if he sends people. Donovan moved fast, kneeling beside my chair so we were eye level. His hands caught mine, warm and steady and grounding. Look at me, Sofia. I did, meeting those ice blue eyes that held certainty instead of fear. No one is taking you anywhere. Not Marco, not his associates, not anyone. You don't understand what he's capable of. I understand perfectly. His voice was firm, absolute. I understand that Marco Salazar is a mid-level enforcer for a criminal organization, that he has connections and resources, and that he's been looking for you since you left Chicago. At my shocked expression, he continued, I had my people run a background check on you after you found that camera. Standard protocol for anyone entering my inner circle, even temporarily. You investigated me? I verified you. The distinction seemed important to him. And what I found was a woman with no criminal record, no outstanding warrants, no connections to organized crime beyond an unfortunate relationship that she was smart enough to leave. I also found that Marco filed a missing persons report 3 months after you disappeared, not because he cared about your safety, but because he wanted official channels looking for you too. He stood, pulling me up with him. Here's what's going to happen. Richard will arrive in 45 minutes. We'll handle that situation. And then you're coming home with me. Home with you? I repeated, stunned, to my penthouse. Under my protection. With my security. His tone left no room for argument. Marco wants to threaten you? He can go through me first. And trust me, Sofia, I'm significantly more dangerous than a cartel enforcer who thinks intimidation is a strategy. You don't owe me that kind of protection. I just cleaned your office and found a camera. That doesn't make me your responsibility. No, Donovan agreed. But you chose to warn me when you could have stayed silent. You chose to help me instead of protecting yourself. And you're about to witness something that makes you an accessory to whatever happens when Richard arrives. His hand still held mine, his thumbs brushing my knuckles in a gesture that was almost tender. That makes you my responsibility, Sofia, and I protect what's mine. The possessiveness of the statement should have frightened me. Instead, I felt something loosen in my chest, the constant tension I'd carried for 11 months. The exhausting vigilance of always looking over my shoulder. The bone-deep weariness of surviving alone. Why? I asked quietly. Why would you do this for me? Donovan was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching my face as if trying to decode something complex. Because you remind me of myself, he said finally. After my father died, after Thomas's betrayal, I was angry and terrified and trying to survive in a world that had revealed itself to be far more dangerous than I'd understood. I had money and resources, which you don't, but I also had no one I could truly trust. No one who understood what betrayal costs. He released one of my hands, his fingers moving to tilt my chin up gently. You found that camera because you recognized a setup, because you've been betrayed before and you learned to read the signs. That kind of instinct is rare, Sofia. Valuable. And I'm not about to let Marco Salazar eliminate a valuable asset just because he's too stupid to recognize when he's lost. I'm not an asset, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. No, Donovan agreed, his slight smile softening the intensity of his gaze. You're a partner, at least for today. And I protect my partners. Before I could respond, James appeared in the doorway. Boss, Richard just entered the building. ETA 12 minutes. Donovan's entire demeanor shifted. The man who'd been offering comfort transforming into something colder, harder, more dangerous. Everyone in position? Cameras are live. Audio is recording. Team is stationed at all exits. The external contractors Richard hired are maintaining position outside. They have no idea we've identified them. James's smile was predatory. Richard's walking into a perfect trap. Good. Donovan turned back to me. Stay in this conference room. Watch through the monitor if you want, but don't enter my office unless I specifically call for you. What's about to happen? It won't be pleasant. I can handle it, I said, drawing on reserves of courage I wasn't sure I possessed. I know you can. He squeezed my hand once, a gesture of reassurance or solidarity, or maybe something more complicated. But you don't have to handle it alone anymore. Then he was gone, moving into his office, where the trap was set, where Richard Moss would arrive, believing he was about to execute the perfect crime, unaware that every detail had been anticipated, countered, turned against him. I settled into the conference room chair, pulling up the monitor feed that showed multiple angles of Donovan's office. The camera Richard had planted was still in place, still recording, its red light blinking steadily. To anyone monitoring the feed, everything would appear normal. Just another morning, another authorization, another routine transfer. 8:47. The elevator chimed. Richard Moss stepped onto the 42nd floor, and I got my first clear look at the man who'd orchestrated this elaborate betrayal. He was in his mid-40s, professionally dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost $5,000, with the kind of practiced smile that came from decades of corporate manipulation. Handsome in a generic way, good bone structure, expensive haircut, teeth too white to be natural, and on his right hand, clearly visible even through the camera feed, was the Yale class ring that had appeared in the security footage. He walked toward Donovan's office with confident familiarity, nodding to James, who stood guard outside. Morning, James. Boss asked me to come by early to review the transfer authorization. He's expecting you, James confirmed, his expression neutral, professional. He opened the door, allowing Richard to enter. On the monitor, I watched Richard step into the office. Donovan sat behind his desk, the picture of a busy executive reviewing documents. The papers from the safe were still spread across the desk surface, positioned perfectly for the hidden camera to capture. Richard, thanks for coming in early. Donovan's voice was calm, pleasant. I wanted to review these authorization documents one more time before we execute the transfer. $200 million is a significant commitment, of course. Richard settled into the chair across from Donovan with easy confidence. Though I have to say, we've been over these documents extensively. Everything is in order. The offshore construction account is ready to receive the funds. Our contractors in the Caymans are standing by to begin work the moment the money arrives. I'm sure they are, Donovan replied smoothly. He slid a document across the desk. But this clause here about the authorization signature, it requires my personal verification code, correct? Richard leaned forward to examine the document, his expression completely composed. Yes, standard protocol for transfers over 100 million. You input your personal code, the system verifies your identity, and the transfer executes automatically. And this code, I assume it's been changed recently? After the last security audit? Changed 6 months ago, per your instructions. Richard's smile never wavered. I handled the update myself as your CFO. Made sure it was properly encrypted and secured. Of course you did. Donovan leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed, almost casual. Tell me, Richard, in the 4 years you've been my CFO, have I ever given you reason to doubt my leadership? The question seemed to catch Richard off guard. What? No, of course not. Donovan, you're one of the most brilliant strategists I've ever worked with. Cold Development's success under your leadership speaks for itself, and yet, Donovan's voice went cold. You planted a surveillance camera in my office to record my authorization of this transfer. You compromised my security by removing my trusted guard and replacing him with your own contractors. You stole documents from my personal safe to position them perfectly for that camera. He paused. And you really thought I wouldn't notice? Richard's face went pale. His eyes darted to the bookshelf where the camera was hidden, then back to Donovan. I don't know what you're talking about. Donovan, if someone's been feeding you paranoid conspiracy theories, save it. Donovan's hand moved, and suddenly he was holding the same compact pistol I'd seen earlier. The weapon wasn't pointed at Richard yet, just resting on the desk between them, a promise of violence held in check by the thinnest margin of control. James, bring in our evidence. James entered, carrying a tablet. He set it on the desk, turning it so Richard could see the screen. The security footage played Richard entering the office at 2:43 a.m., installing the camera, adjusting the documents on the desk. His Yale class ring clearly visible in every frame. Richard's carefully constructed composure crumbled. You don't understand. I can explain, you can try, Donovan interrupted. But first, let's review what I already know. You planned to steal $200 million from me this morning. You set up an offshore construction account that exists only on paper, no actual contractors, no actual development deal. You intended to transfer the money, document my authorization through that camera, and then disappear with enough capital to start your own development company. He leaned forward, his eyes absolutely cold. What you didn't anticipate was that my janitor has better instincts than my entire executive team. That she'd notice your camera and warn me before you could execute your plan. That I'd have time to prepare a response. Richard's eyes darted around the room, clearly calculating escape routes, options, anything that might salvage this situation. The camera was insurance. You've been erratic lately, making risky decisions. I needed documentation in case you needed evidence to destroy me when your theft was discovered, Donovan finished. Make it look like I'd authorized an illegitimate transfer, claim you were just following my orders. Classic setup. Almost elegant in its simplicity. He stood, moving around the desk with predatory grace. But you made mistakes, Richard. You underestimated my security protocols. You assumed I'd never check on Marcus. And you drastically underestimated the consequences of betrayal. Donovan, please, Richard's voice cracked. We can work this out. I'll return everything. I'll resign quietly. Just let me walk away. Walk away? Donovan's laugh was harsh. You tried to destroy everything my father built. You tried to steal $200 million and frame me for criminal negligence. You compromised my security and endangered everyone in this organization. He moved closer. And you think I'm going to let you walk away? I have insurance too. Richard's desperation made his voice rise. Documents. Evidence of some of your less legal business dealings. If anything happens to me, they go straight to the authorities. You touch me, and you'll spend the rest of your life in prison. Donovan smiled, and it was the coldest expression I'd ever seen. Show me. What? Your insurance? These documents that supposedly incriminate me. Show them to me right now, or admit you're bluffing. Richard's hand moved to his phone, fumbling with shaking fingers. He pulled up something on the screen, holding it out to Donovan with the desperate triumph of someone playing their last card. It's all here. Financial records, offshore accounts, deals that would interest the FBI very much. Time-stamped and uploaded to a secure server that releases automatically if I don't check in every 12 hours. Donovan took the phone, examined the screen, then handed it to James. Verify this is real, then shut it down. James took the phone, his fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. It's real. Dead man's switch protocol, fairly sophisticated. Give me 20 minutes and I can neutralize it. You have 10, Donovan said. As James left with Richard's phone, the CFO seemed to shrink in his chair, the last of his defenses crumbling. You're going to kill me? Yes, Donovan confirmed simply. Please. Tears were streaming down Richard's face now, all pretense of corporate composure gone. I have a family, a daughter in college, a son in high school. They don't deserve to lose their father because I made a mistake. My father had a family too, Donovan said quietly. Me. And I lost him because his partner betrayed him. Because Thomas Garrett decided that friendship and loyalty mattered less than power and money. He crouched down so he was eye level with Richard. So, yes, your children will lose their father. But unlike you, I'll make sure they're taken care of financially. That's more mercy than you planned to show me. I wasn't going to kill you, Richard protested weakly. No, you were going to destroy my reputation, steal my money, and frame me for crimes that would have ended my career and possibly my freedom. In some ways, that's worse than a clean death. Donovan stood. At least I'm offering you a quick end. Richard's gaze moved to the hidden camera, desperate hope flaring. This is being recorded. You're confessing to premeditated murder on camera. How is that smart, Donovan? Because I control that camera now, Donovan replied. James disconnected it from your external feed 30 minutes ago. Everything being recorded now goes to my servers, my security team, my lawyers. Documentation that you attempted theft and blackmail, that you threatened my organization, that you left me no choice but to protect myself." He pulled out his phone, typing something quickly. "Self-defense. That's what my lawyers will argue if your body is ever found. That you came here to blackmail me, that you threatened me, that I feared for my life. No one will believe that," Richard said. But his voice held no conviction. "Everyone will believe it," Donovan corrected. "Because I'm Donovan Cole, and you're a CFO who tried to steal $200 million. Because I have resources and connections and lawyers who can make any narrative stick. And because," he paused as James Ray entered, nodding to indicate the dead man's switch had been neutralized. "Because I'm the one who gets to write the ending." From my position in the conference room, I watched it all unfold with a strange detachment. I should have been horrified, should have been calling the police, trying to stop what was clearly about to become a murder, but all I could think about was Marco, threatening me over the phone just an hour ago. About my father, who'd died when I was 16 because he'd trusted the wrong business partner. About all the people who'd been destroyed by betrayals they never saw coming. Richard had planned to destroy Donovan through patient, calculated treachery. Now he was facing the consequences of that choice. That felt like justice. Donovan looked directly at the camera, not Richard's hidden surveillance, but the one James had installed earlier. Looking directly at me, through the monitor, his eyes holding a question. I understood what he was asking. This was my moment to leave, to walk away, to maintain plausible deniability about whatever happened next, to choose safety over complicity. Instead, I stood up, left the conference room, and walked into Donovan's office. Both men looked at me, Richard with desperate hope, as if I might be his salvation. Donovan, with something like satisfaction, as if I'd passed a test he'd set without my knowledge. "Sofia," Donovan said quietly, "you don't need to be here for this. I know." I moved to stand beside him, consciously choosing my position. "But you said we were partners. And partners don't hide from the hard parts." Richard looked between us, understanding dawning. You're the janitor who found the camera. I'm the woman who recognized your betrayal," I corrected. "Because I've seen it before. Seen how men like you smile while planning destruction. How you justify theft and treachery as just business, just strategy, just taking what you deserve. This isn't your business," Richard said desperately. "You're just a cleaning lady. You don't understand corporate." "I understand betrayal," I interrupted. "I understand that you made a choice to destroy someone who trusted you. And I understand that choices have consequences." I looked at Donovan. "Do it." His expression shifted: surprise, respect, something darker that might have been attraction or might have been recognition of a kindred darkness. "You're certain?" "I'm certain that if you let him live, he'll spend the rest of his life trying to destroy you. That men like Richard don't learn from mercy, they see it as weakness to exploit." I met his eyes. "I'm certain that I'm tired of watching bad people escape consequences while good people suffer." "So yes, I'm certain." Donovan nodded once. Then he looked at James. "Take him to the car. Make it clean. Make it look like suicide embezzler who couldn't face the consequences of his actions. Leave the body somewhere public enough to be found quickly, private enough that there are no witnesses." James moved forward, and Richard screamed. The sound was raw, primal, a man facing the end of everything. 2 more security team members entered, helping James restrain the struggling CFO. "Wait." Richard's voice cracked with desperation. Sofia, please. You seem like a good person. You can't let this happen. You can't be part of this." I looked at him, this man who'd planned elaborate betrayal, who'd stolen from his employer, who'd been willing to destroy lives for money, and I felt nothing but cold certainty. "I'm not a good person," I said quietly. "Not anymore. Chicago burned that out of me. But I'm a person who understands justice. And this is justice." They dragged him from the office, his screams echoing down the hallway until the elevator doors closed, cutting off the sound with mechanical finality. Silence settled over Donovan's office. Dawn light streamed through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold that felt obscene given what had just transpired. "You didn't have to do that," Donovan said finally, moving to pour 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter on his sidebar. He offered me one, and I took it, my hands surprisingly steady. Staying in the conference room would have been safer, legally, morally. I stopped caring about legal and moral the night I ran from Chicago, I replied, taking a sip of whiskey that burned smooth and expensive down my throat. And you were right, we're partners. That means sharing the hard parts, the consequences, the decisions that can't be undone. He studied me over the rim of his glass, those ice blue eyes seeing something that made him smile slightly. You really aren't what I expected, Sofia Reyes. Neither are you, I admitted. I expected a ruthless billionaire, got that. But I didn't expect someone who'd offer protection to a janitor who stumbled into his crisis. Someone who'd understand what it means to survive betrayal. Maybe we recognize each other, Donovan suggested. Two people who learned that the world is more dangerous than we thought, that trust is a luxury we can't afford, that sometimes survival requires becoming harder than the things trying to destroy us. He set down his glass and moved closer, his hands coming up to frame my face with surprising gentleness. I meant what I said earlier. You're under my protection now. Marco wants to threaten you? He'll have to go through me and my entire organization. Richard wanted to destroy me? He's being handled. Anyone who tries to hurt you will face the same consequences. Why? I asked again, needing to understand. I'm nobody. A janitor who found a camera. That doesn't make me worth this level of protection. You're someone who chose loyalty over safety, he corrected. Someone who saw betrayal and warned me instead of using it as leverage or running away. Someone who just stood beside me and gave permission for something that makes you criminally complicit in whatever legal consequences might follow. His thumbs brushed my cheekbones. That makes you rare, Sofia. Valuable. Worth protecting. I should have stepped back, should have maintained professional distance, should have recognized that this intensity was dangerous in about a dozen different ways. Instead, I leaned into his touch, into the solid warmth of someone offering shelter. After 11 months of being cold and alone and perpetually afraid, what happens now? I asked quietly. Now you come home with me. We make sure Marco understands that you're under protection. He can't challenge. We set you up somewhere safe, not a studio in Queens where you're vulnerable, but in my building, with my security. He paused, and we figure out what comes next, together. I don't want to be kept, I said, needing him to understand. I don't want to be some rescued damsel who owes you forever, who becomes another possession in your collection. I don't want to keep you, Donovan replied. I want to partner with you. You have instincts. I need perspectives. My organization lacks the ability to spot threats before they mature into crisis. His slight smile held genuine warmth. Plus, you make excellent decisions under pressure. You don't panic in dangerous situations, and you apparently have no moral qualms about witnessing justice being delivered. That's a job offer. That's an opportunity. Work with me officially. Help me identify vulnerabilities in my organization. Threats I'm not seeing, patterns of betrayal before they become catastrophic. He released my face, stepping back to give me space. I'll pay you significantly more than the cleaning company does, provide security, housing, protection from Marco and anyone else who might threaten you. In return, you use those instincts that found Richard's camera to help me prevent the next betrayal. It was insane. Accepting meant diving fully into Donovan's world, becoming part of whatever dangerous empire he'd built, complicit in methods that existed far outside legal boundaries. But staying in my current life meant waiting for Marco to send someone, meant looking over my shoulder forever, meant returning to invisibility and fear and the grinding exhaustion of surviving alone. I'll need guarantees, I said finally, not just about my safety, but about my autonomy. I'm not interested in being controlled or manipulated or used. Full autonomy. Donovan agreed immediately. You're a consultant, not an employee. You have complete authority to investigate any aspect of my operations, question any decision, veto any plan you think is compromised. He extended his hand. Partners, real partners, equal stake in outcomes. I looked at his offered hand, at this man who'd admitted to murder, who'd just ordered his CFO's execution, who represented everything dangerous about wealth and power and checked by conventional morality. And I thought about Richard, screaming as he was dragged away to face consequences for his betrayal. About Marco, who'd escaped all consequences for years of violence and intimidation. About a world where the powerful preyed on everyone else and called it business. If Donovan was offering me a weapon to fight back against that world, to ensure that betrayers faced justice and threats were neutralized before they could destroy lives, then maybe that was worth the moral cost. I took his hand. Partners. His grip was warm, firm, sealing something that felt momentous. "Welcome to the Empire, Sofia. Let's build something that can't be torn down by simple betrayal." As dawn broke fully over Manhattan, painting the city in shades of gold and promise, I stood in Donovan Cole's office and made my choice. Not safety, not invisibility, not running, but power, partnership, the chance to finally stop being prey and become something far more dangerous. The women in my family had instincts that saved lives. My grandmother used to say, "I'd just used mine to save Donovan's empire." Now we'd see what we could build together. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. 3 months transformed everything. Donovan's penthouse became my home, a space so far removed from my queen's studio that it might as well have existed on another planet. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, rooms larger than entire apartments, amenities I'd only seen in magazines. But more than the luxury, it offered something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine safety. Marco had made one attempt to reach me. A week after I'd moved in, 2 of his associates had shown up at the Apex Tower, asking questions about a cleaning woman named Sofia Reyes. They'd made it as far as the lobby before Donovan's security identified them, detained them, and delivered a very clear message. I never learned exactly what that message entailed. I just knew that Marco called my phone days later, not to threaten, but to negotiate. To acknowledge that I was under new management and therefore untouchable by his organization's standards. The call had lasted 30 seconds. He hadn't contacted me since. That was Donovan's world. Problems didn't linger, they got resolved, usually permanently, always efficiently. My role in his organization had evolved beyond simple threat assessment. I'd become his strategic partner in the truest sense, reviewing contracts for hidden vulnerabilities, interviewing new hires for signs of potential betrayal, analyzing business deals for the kind of patient treachery that Richard had attempted. My instincts, honed by years of survival, proved invaluable in identifying threats before they could fully form. But something else had evolved too. Something neither of us had named, but both of us felt. It started with working dinners that stretched past midnight, Donovan and I reviewing intelligence reports while sharing expensive takeout, our hands occasionally brushing as we passed documents, the touches lingering longer each time. It continued with morning coffee on his terrace, watching the city wake up while discussing security protocols, standing close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, smell the cedar of his cologne mixing with espresso. And it intensified during late nights when we'd both be too exhausted to maintain professional distance. When he'd fall asleep on the couch reviewing contracts, and I'd cover him with a blanket. Or when I'd doze off at my desk and wake to find him carrying me to my bedroom with surprising gentleness. We were circling each other like weary fighters, both aware of the attraction, both hesitant to cross the line that would transform our partnership into something far more complicated. That changed. On a Tuesday in late September, I was in Donovan's home office, technically the library, but he'd converted it into a secondary workspace, reviewing background checks on potential investors when James appeared in the doorway. His expression grim. "We have a problem." I'd learned to read James's expressions. Grim meant serious. This went beyond grim into something darker. What kind of problem? I set down the documents, already moving toward the main office where Donovan would be, the kind that requires the boss to make a decision he won't want to make. James fell into step beside me. "It's about Richard." My stomach clenched. Richard Moss had been found 3 days after his disappearance, exactly as Donovan had orchestrated. Apparent suicide, investigators ruled. Embezzler overwhelmed by guilt, the narrative went. His family had been devastated, but financially secured by a mysterious life insurance policy that Donovan had quietly arranged. The case was closed, except apparently it wasn't. Donovan was on the phone when we entered, speaking in the clipped tones he used when containing fury. "I don't care what his brother thinks, he knows. The case is closed. Richard Moss killed himself. End of discussion." He ended the call with controlled violence, setting the phone down precisely on his desk before looking up at us. "Richard's brother is asking questions. Uncomfortable questions about the timeline, about Richard's state of mind, about why a man planning to steal $200 million would kill himself before actually executing the theft." Daniel Moss, James provided. Former prosecutor, now in private practice. Smart, connected, and apparently unconvinced by the suicide narrative. How much does he know? I asked, moving to stand beside Donovan's desk. Enough to be dangerous. He's requested Richard's phone records, his financial statements, security footage from the Apex Tower for the week before his death. Donovan's jaw tightened. He's building a case, probably planning to file a wrongful death suit, force an investigation that could unravel everything. I thought through the implications quickly. The security footage has been scrubbed, right? No evidence of Richard being brought here that morning. No record of the confrontation? The footage is clean, James confirmed. But Daniel has resources. If he pushes hard enough, if he gets the right judge, if he convinces someone to look deeper, there are threads that could be pulled. Then we eliminate the threads, Donovan said coldly, before they can unravel into something catastrophic. The casual way he said it, eliminate, made the meaning clear. Daniel Moss was a problem. Problems got solved. Usually, permanently. No, the word came out before I could think it through. Both men looked at me. Donovan's expression was carefully neutral, but I saw the sharpness in his eyes, the assessment. No? He repeated quietly. Daniel Moss isn't Richard. He's not a betrayer who tried to destroy you. He's a brother seeking answers about his sibling's death. I moved around the desk, positioning myself between Donovan and James. Killing him doesn't eliminate the problem, it creates a bigger one. A dead prosecutor raises more questions than a live one, asking uncomfortable ones. He's already raising uncomfortable questions, Donovan pointed out. Questions that could lead to investigations we can't afford. So we give him answers. I pulled up a chair, my mind already working through alternatives. Not the truth, obviously, but something that satisfies his need for closure while protecting us. Donovan leaned back in his chair, his attention fully focused on me. What kind of answers? The kind that redirect his investigation away from you. I grabbed a notepad, sketching out a strategy as I spoke. Richard was stealing from you? Yes. But what if he was also being blackmailed? What if someone discovered his embezzlement plans and was forcing him to go through with it, threatening to expose him to you if he didn't comply? James caught on immediately. And when Richard realized he couldn't pull off the theft, couldn't satisfy both the blackmailer and avoid getting caught, he killed himself rather than face either outcome. I finished. It's tragic, it's plausible, and it gives Daniel a villain to blame who isn't Donovan. Except we'd need evidence of this blackmailer, Donovan said. But I could see the calculation in his eyes. The strategic mind engaging with the possibility. Communications demands proof that someone was coercing Richard, which we can create, I said. Fake email account set up months ago. Messages sent to Richard's personal email demanding he execute the theft or face exposure. We backdate everything. Make it look like Richard was trying to handle this quietly, desperately, until the pressure became too much. And the blackmailer's identity? James asked. Someone untraceable. Someone who exists just enough to seem real, but can never be found. I looked at Donovan. One of Richard's former business associates, maybe. Someone he crossed years ago, who waited for the right opportunity for revenge. Donovan was quiet for a long moment. His fingers steepled beneath his chin, his eyes moving between me and the notes I'd sketched. It's complicated. Requires significant preparation. Creating a false digital trail that can withstand investigation isn't simple, but it's possible, I pressed. And it's better than the alternative. Daniel Moss wants justice for his brother. Give him a target for that justice, one that doesn't lead back to you. She's right, boss, James said quietly. Eliminating Daniel creates more problems than it solves. This approach is cleaner, smarter, and it keeps our hands relatively clean. Donovan stood, moving to the windows where Manhattan glittered in afternoon light. I watched the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands curled into fists and released. The visible effort of choosing strategy over the immediate satisfaction of removing a threat. How long would it take to create this evidence? He asked finally. 72 hours, James estimated. Maybe less if we dedicate full resources to it. Do it. Donovan turned back to us. Create the blackmailer, build the narrative, make it airtight. I want Daniel Moss to find exactly what we want him to find, and nothing else. He looked at me. This was your idea, Sofia. You're in charge of the operation. James provides technical support, but the strategy is yours. The weight of that responsibility settled over me. This wasn't just advising anymore, this was actively constructing a false narrative to mislead an investigation, to protect Donovan from consequences of Richard's execution. This was crossing another line, one that couldn't be uncrossed. "I'll handle it," I said, meeting his eyes. After James left to begin preparations, I remained in Donovan's office. He stood at the windows, his back to me, the silence stretching between us. "You think I'm a monster," he said finally. "Not a question. I think you're someone who protects what's his with every tool available." I moved to stand beside him, looking out at the city we both inhabited, but experienced so differently. "And I think you would have killed Daniel Moss without hesitation if I hadn't offered an alternative." Yes, no denial, no justification, just acknowledgement. "But you listened when I said no. You considered a different approach, even though elimination is cleaner, faster, more certain." I turned to face him. "That's not what a monster does, Donovan. That's what someone with the capacity for restraint does." His slight smile held darkness. "Or it's what someone does when they trust their partner's strategic instincts more than their own immediate impulses." "Is that what I am?" I asked quietly. "Your partner? Or your conscience? The voice that keeps you from becoming the thing your enemies accuse you of being?" Donovan turned fully to face me, his hands coming up to frame my face with the gentleness that always surprised me. "You're both. You're the strategic mind that sees angles I miss and the moral compass that keeps me from making decisions I'll regret." His thumbs brushed my cheekbones. "You're also the woman I think about constantly. The one I want to wake up beside. The one who's made this penthouse feel like home instead of just expensive real estate." My breath caught. We'd been circling this conversation for months, both aware of where we were heading, but hesitant to name it. "Donovan, I know it's complicated," he interrupted. "I know I'm dangerous, that my world is dangerous, that I've asked you to become complicit in things most people would find unforgivable." His eyes held mine. "But I also know that when I'm with you, I'm better, more strategic, more thoughtful, less likely to choose violence when other options exist." "You're saying I make you a better person?" "I'm saying you make me a person, instead of just a collection of defenses and strategic calculations." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against mine. "I'm saying I want you, Sofia, not as an employee, or even just as a partner, as something more, as everything." I should have said no, should have recognized that mixing business with desire was dangerous, that letting myself care for someone like Donovan Cole would end badly, that the smartest move was maintaining professional distance. Instead, I closed the remaining space between us and kissed him. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was 3 months of denied attraction, of circling each other, of late nights and shared danger and gradually eroding boundaries. His hands moved from my face to my waist, pulling me closer, and I responded by threading my fingers through his dark hair, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a shifting world. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his smile was genuine and warm, and entirely without the cold calculation he showed the rest of the world. "That's a yes then?" he asked, his voice rough. We're probably making a terrible decision, but I don't care," I corrected, already pulling him back down for another kiss. We made it as far as the couch in his office before the urgency overwhelmed us. His hands mapped territory they'd been denied for months, learning the curves and angles of my body with focused intensity. I returned the favor, discovering the scars he hid beneath expensive suits, the evidence of a life lived dangerously that his polished exterior concealed. "Sofia," he said my name like a prayer or a plea, and something in me that had been locked away since Chicago finally opened. What happened next was both tender and desperate to people who'd survived by staying guarded, finally allowing themselves to be vulnerable to trust, to want without immediately calculating the cost. Afterward, we lay tangled together on the couch, the afternoon light painting everything in shades of gold, the city humming far below in indifferent beauty. "This changes things," I said quietly, my head resting on his chest, where I could hear the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Everything," he agreed, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my shoulder. "But I'm not interested in going back to before." "Are you?" I thought about it honestly, about the professional distance we'd maintained, the careful boundaries, the partnership that had been effective precisely because it remained strictly business. And I thought about this lying in his arms, feeling safe and wanted, and like I'd finally found something worth staying for instead of running from. "No," I admitted. I'm not interested in going back. Good. He pulled me closer, possessive and protective in equal measure. Because you're mine now, Sophia. Completely. And I protect what's mine. The possessiveness should have frightened me. Instead, I felt only certainty. Because I'd seen how Donovan protected what was his with every resource available, with strategic brilliance and ruthless efficiency and unwavering commitment, Marco had threatened me with violence. Donovan had neutralized that threat with a single conversation backed by absolute power. Richard had tried to destroy Donovan's empire. We'd ensured he faced permanent consequences. Daniel Moss was asking dangerous questions. I was building a false narrative to redirect his investigation and protect us both. This was who we were now, partners in every sense. Bound by shared danger and complementary darkness, and something that might have been love if either of us believed in things that simple. The next 72 hours passed in intense preparation. James's technical team created the fictional blackmailer, a former business associate of Richard's named Marcus Webb, who'd disappeared from public records 5 years earlier. Perfect. Because you can't investigate someone who doesn't exist, we constructed an elaborate email trail showing Webb discovering Richard's embezzlement plans and demanding a cut in exchange for silence. We created fake financial transactions showing Richard desperately trying to satisfy Webb's demands while also setting up the theft from Donovan. We even planted digital breadcrumbs suggesting Webb had fled the country after Richard's death, likely fearing exposure. The narrative we built was airtight, tragic, and completely false. But it gave Daniel Moss exactly what he needed: a villain to blame, closure about his brother's death, and a logical explanation that didn't require investigating Donovan Cole any further. On the fourth day, we arranged for Daniel to accidentally discover evidence of the blackmail scheme. Anonymous tip to his email, pointing him toward Richard's personal server. From there, he found everything we'd planted. His investigation leading exactly where we'd designed it to go. I watched it unfold from Donovan's office, monitoring Daniel's digital footprint as he uncovered each piece of manufactured evidence. It was like watching a chess game where only one player knew the board was rigged. He's taking the bait, I reported, tracking Daniel's searches. He just hired a forensic accountant to trace the payments to Webb. He'll find the offshore accounts we created, the money trails we established, everything pointing away from you. Donovan stood behind me, his hands on my shoulders, watching the monitor over my head. You're brilliant at this. I'm good at creating believable lies, I corrected. That's not brilliance, that's survival skill. I learned how to construct narratives that protected me from Marco. Now I'm using those same skills to protect us. Us, he repeated, his hands tightening slightly. I like how that sounds. I turned in my chair to face him. We're really doing this, aren't we? Full partnership. Business and personal. No going back. No going back, he confirmed. Which means you need to understand something, Sophia. My world, our world now, it doesn't get safer. Threats will keep coming. People will keep trying to destroy what we're building. And we'll keep handling those threats with whatever methods prove necessary. I know, I stood, moving into his arms with the ease that had become natural over the past few days. I'm not naive enough to think this was a one-time situation. I know that being with you means accepting violence as a tool, betrayal as a constant possibility, and moral compromise as standard operating procedure. And you're okay with that? I thought about my grandmother's rosary, still tucked in my bedside drawer, about the good girl I'd been before Chicago, before Marco, before learning that the world was far crueler than Sunday school had suggested. I'm okay with it, because the alternative is going back to being powerless, I said honestly. Being prey instead of predator. Hiding instead of hunting. I spent 11 months running from Marco, terrified he'd find me, knowing I had no resources to fight back if he did. I looked up at Donovan. You gave me power, protection, the ability to ensure that threats get neutralized before they can destroy us. That's worth the moral cost. His kiss was possessive, claiming, sealing something that felt permanent. When he pulled back, his eyes held the intensity I'd come to crave. Then let's finish this, he said. Let's make sure Daniel Moss gets his closure and leaves us alone. And then he smiled, sharp and dangerous. Then we keep building. Empire, partnership, everything. Daniel Moss held a press conference 2 weeks later. I watched it from Donovan's penthouse, curled up on the couch with expensive coffee and the satisfaction of watching a plan unfold perfectly. After extensive investigation, Daniel announced to the assembled reporters, I've discovered that my brother Richard was being blackmailed by a former business associate. This individual discovered Richard's plans for embezzlement and coerced him into executing the theft, threatening exposure if Richard refused. His voice cracked with genuine emotion. The pressure became unbearable. Richard, unable to see a way out, chose to end his own life rather than continue down a path that violated everything he believed in. The reporters erupted with questions. Daniel fielded them calmly, explaining about Marcus Webb, about the evidence he'd found, about his belief that this mysterious blackmailer had fled the country and might never be brought to justice. Not once did he mention Donovan Cole. The narrative had worked. Daniel had his closure. The investigation was redirected toward a ghost who could never be found. And we were safe. Donovan entered the room as the press conference ended, settling beside me on the couch. "You did that," he said quietly. "You saved us from an investigation that could have destroyed everything." "We did that," I corrected. "You trusted my strategy instead of defaulting to elimination." "That's growth, Donovan. That's choosing to be better than your worst impulses, only because you gave me a better option." He pulled me against his side, his arm wrapping around me with casual possessiveness. "You know what this means, right? You're not just my partner in business anymore. You're essential. The strategic mind that keeps me from making catastrophic mistakes, and you're essential to me," I admitted. "The protection that keeps me from spending my life running. The power that ensures Marco and everyone else like him can never touch me again." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the news cycle move on to other stories, other scandals, other tragedies that would dominate headlines until the next big thing came along. Richard Moss's death was already fading from public consciousness, becoming just another cautionary tale about the pressures of corporate life. No one would ever know the truth that he'd been executed for betrayal, that his suicide had been staged, that the investigation had been manipulated through carefully constructed lies. That was Donovan's world. Our world now, where truth was malleable, justice was whatever we decided it was, and consequences were delivered with precision and permanence. What happens now? I asked, the question carrying weight beyond the immediate situation. Donovan was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing patterns on my shoulder. "Now, you keep building. I have enemies who will test us, business deals that require your strategic input, threats that need to be identified before they mature into crisis." He paused. "And I have you. Finally, fully, without reservation." "You're talking about the future," I observed. "Like we're permanent, aren't we?" He shifted so he could see my face. "Sofia, you've seen the worst of me. You've witnessed murder, participated in cover-ups, helped construct elaborate lies to protect us from consequences. You've chosen this life, this darkness, with full knowledge of what it costs." His hand moved to cup my face. "If that doesn't make us permanent, I don't know what does." He was right. I'd crossed every line that mattered, made myself complicit in his world through active participation rather than passive acceptance. There was no going back to the woman I'd been, the frightened janitor hiding in Queens, the Chicago survivor who'd chosen running over fighting. I'd become something else entirely. Donovan's partner, his strategist, his conscience when he needed one, and his accomplice when circumstances required it. And somewhere in that transformation, I'd also become the woman he loved, the one he trusted with his empire, his secrets, his vulnerable moments when the mask came off and he was just a man seeking connection in a dangerous world. Permanent, I agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. Outside the windows, New York continued its relentless rhythm. Millions of people pursuing their ordinary lives, unaware that in a penthouse high above Central Park, two people had just committed to something extraordinary, a partnership forged in betrayal and secured through violence, a love that existed in the spaces between morality and survival, a future built on the understanding that sometimes the only way to stay safe was to become dangerous. My grandmother used to say that women in our family had instincts that saved lives. I'd used mine to save Donovan Cole's empire, and in return, he'd given me back my life, not the one I'd lost in Chicago, but something better, stronger, more powerful than I'd ever imagined possible. We were monsters, perhaps, but we were monsters together, and that made all the difference. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.